not but a million miles from their worlds of ups and downs. For one day each week in a one-room flat, they lived in a different time. A room with no past, no future, where the two can't leave it all behind. They danced a slow dance as the sun sank down. Tuesdays in Chinatown.
That's the wonderful Andy Bay singing a song about two people who have a secret life. Everybody has all kinds of secrets, right? And there's some secrets that are almost more private thoughts. I'll give you an example. So there's a great Southwest Airlines commercial, which you may recall, in which some general gets rushed into a situation room where there's, 50 people working on this terrible security breach. And they say, "General, we need to lock it down. We need your password to lock the system down." And he says, "My password? The one that I use?" And they said, "Yes, General." And they get this 50-foot wide screen that they're all looking at. And he finally goes, HATEMYJOB1. So his password is "I hate my job," which obviously is something he was not sharing. And in fact, one of our guests has a list of 38 categories of secrets, and job dissatisfaction is one of them. I don't know. That feels more like just a private thought, which is maybe not the same thing as a secret. But let me just say one other thing before we start. I have always believed that there's a secret, a family secret that I don't know. And I have some pretty good reasons for thinking that. And I was brought up as an only child. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that I had a half sibling somewhere. Something like that. My parents, I could tell you I would waste too much time, but my parents were obviously keeping some kind of secret, and they were just almost absurdly unforthcoming about basic kinds of questions. So, and I think that kind of seeps into things. It's not a secret I'm keeping. It's a secret kept from me. But I think it's affected my life in certain ways. Anyway, we're going to talk a lot about secrets today. We're going to begin with somebody we talked to, I think the last time we talked in a systematic way about secrets, Dr. Michael Slepian, a researcher who studies psychology of secrecy as well as an associate professor at Columbia Business School. He wrote the book, The Secret Life of Secrets. Michael Slepian, welcome back to our show.
Thanks for having me.
It's been 10 long years. And
That's right.
So, a number of things have happened since you were on the last time, and you were just starting your research into secrecy. And one of the first things you looked at is, we often talk kind of metaphorically about the burden of a secret, but there's a way in which the burden of a secret really is almost a physical burden, right? We experience it in a somewhat similar way.
Yeah, so this is what we talked about 10 years ago when I just started this program of research, and I didn't yet know where it would take me. In those initial studies, what we were looking at is this very idea. People talk about secrets in this curious way. A secret can weigh you down. A secret can be heavy or burdensome. And my original studies explored that metaphor, essentially, and found that people don't just talk about secrets this way. They think about secrets this way. They feel their secrets this way. When they're thinking about a significant secret of theirs, they view the world around them as more challenging to interact with in the same way you would if you were physically encumbered for any reason.
So oddly enough, you had a similar experience to the one I just kind of speculatively described about myself. You were already a secrets researcher, and one day, I think it was while you were interviewing for the job you now have at Columbia.
That's right. Yep.
You got a call from your father, and it was one of those "Are you sitting down?" calls. You take it from there.
Yeah, that's right. So we're still presenting this research. It's still new research at the time. People judge hills as steeper when they're thinking about their secrets and judge distances as farther. So I'm presenting this brand new work as part of a job interview. And at the end of that night, after a very long and exhausting but kind of exciting day talking about my new research on secrets, my dad calls me and he says, "I have a secret to tell you." He does say, are you sitting down? And then he proceeds to tell me that he's not biologically able to have children. He was telling me that he wasn't my biological father. And just this huge secret that was kept from me and my younger brother, who I then learned was my half brother. the family planned to never tell us this secret. That was the original plan.
Right. So, but your father was constantly saying, that hill looks very steep there. I don't know if I want to go. But no, so this isn't, let's break this one down. All right. So this is a secret. The secret isn't really about some kind of act of turpitude. This is more, the big problem with the secret here is the secret. The fact that you weren't told, right? If everybody had been told, it seems to me like, I hate to use the word sin, but the wrong committed, if there is one, is just keeping the secret.
Yeah. And that's how I saw it at the time. I thought like, wow, this is incredibly surprising. And then sort of after a few more moments of pause and reflection, thought, but this is okay. This doesn't change anything. This is very surprising, but it's okay. And I thought it makes my relationships with my dad and, made my relationships with his parents for me more special, not less, and knowing that they weren't based in this sort of genetic obligation type thing. And yeah, it was like, why are you telling me about this now? And why did you never plan to tell us?
And why did I go into secrecy research, come to think of it? But yeah, and I don't know. And obviously, if you're an ornithologist, you see birds in a lot of places. And did you see a change in your father or your parents, your family in general, now that they didn't have to keep the secret anymore? We know the impact on you. Did you ever figure out what it did to them to, quote, unburden themselves of this?
I think it was exactly that. When this information first came out, I had a phone call with my dad, and then I had a phone call with my mom, and then my brother came out to visit me so we could sort of spend some time together and just, try to take a broader look at this very new news at the time. And then there was a point at which, we stopped talking about it. And I think it was no longer a burden for my parents. And, it wasn't a conversation item. Very quickly. And that kind of surprised me looking back on it 10 years later, because I bring up this story in my book. And when I did that, I kind of brought this back to the forefront of all our minds, and it became a conversation topic again.
So, somewhere right now, as you and I are talking, somewhere in America and lots of places in the world, people are spitting into test tubes and mailing them to Ancestry.com or 23andMe. I mean, it seems to me that, if you don't know your family, if you think your family doesn't have a secret, you probably just don't know it. It could be that your cousin is actually your aunt, or it could be that, one of your siblings, was your mother's child by another man. Or it could be, there are these people who have entirely full sets of nuclear families in different locations, and they show up at the funeral. But it seems to me that genetic research, and just genetic research as a consumer item that you can buy into for an affordable sum, is going to create, and probably has created, just avalanches of these kinds of reckonings. I don't know. What have you seen about that, Michael?
Yeah, so you're totally right. I think we're in this time right now where we can learn about these secrets, and we do. And some people go out seeking them when they, take one of these genetic testing kits, hoping to see who they match, with, and by how much. And, I think probably children who are born today, it's going to be a different story, because people know that this can be accessed later down the line. But, for people like me born in the 80s, I think a lot of people my age are now learning these very surprising secrets that were supposed to be secret. I think it's very easy to find stories online of people learning about dozens of half siblings when they go looking.
Right. So isn't every secret sort of a cost-benefit analysis, an implicit cost-benefit analysis? You're keeping a secret because you think the value of keeping the secret exceeds the cost that you would pay. if you gave up on the secret, if you gave it out to the people who might want to know it, you think that the cost of doing that would be very high. There might be a benefit to doing it and just unburdening yourself. And I think one way you could look at this, and this is one that's changed over the decades, is the number of men who didn't feel they could be gay and out, across the decades, and the cost, the risk of coming out as a gay man in the 1950s, 1960s, even 1970s is higher, I think, generally speaking anyway, than it is today. And so, I mean, for any secret like that, isn't that what the person is often thinking about? Is like, it would be good to get this out in the open. I would get it off my chest. But the cost of saying this might be very high for me. And we can talk separately about the cost to the person who hears the secret. But could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, most secrets, we believe we're protecting something by keeping that secret. Maybe it's ourselves and our reputation. Maybe it's another person's feelings or a relationship with someone or someone else's relationship with a third party. And, there's, of course, these costs that we're learning about now today. And I've been studying for the past 10 years. There's so many different ways in which a secret can hurt you. And that's what it does on average. And we can talk about why. But yeah, I think people know there's that cost and often will still keep the secret, hoping to protect the thing that they're hoping to protect, or maybe some of it's inertia as well, or just knowing that it will be better when the secret's out, but do you have the courage to reveal it? Of course, it matters a great deal about what the secret is about.
Right. And you've also looked at the whole question of, do we all want to know secrets that are being kept from us? For example, if your partner had a one-night stand on a business trip 7 years ago, do you necessarily want to know that? And a surprisingly high percentage of people think that what they don't know will hurt them, or at least they want to know. They don't want to be kept in the dark, right?
Yeah, so we ran this study where we asked a couple hundred people to imagine the scenario you presented. We even made some additional caveats. This never happened before. It'll never happen again. Would you want to know? And it really thought a lot of people would think to themselves, well, no, life would be easier not to know that if it truly was a one-time thing and not a symptom of some larger problem. But if I remember the number correctly, it was 77% of people said they would want to know. Some people, when they hear that number, they think, okay, but probably some of those people are wrong. And maybe you should ask them, do you really want to know? but what's important is not necessarily that percentage, but just knowing that some portion of people would want to know and some portion of people would not want to know. And the ideal scenario is you're meeting your partner's expectations. And so it can be a really complicated question. This particular secret is so fraught, and that's why I studied it specifically. But I find that if you're wrestling with this kind of question, you don't need to do it alone. You should talk to someone about it, and that'll help these tough questions.
So, well, actually, before we get to the average number of secrets a person has, we should say, I don't know if birds do it and bees do it, but chimpanzees do it, right? There is some kind of recognizable concealment behavior in chimpanzees.
Yeah, so they have the ability certainly to conceal objects and sort of basic pieces of knowledge. They know if another chimp was witness to something. So they can understand that, where a chimp's eyes are pointed is what they're seeing. And they know if something's happened that they've seen and not the other chimp. And so that allows them to be sneaky in domains that chimps are sneaky in, whether it's, food or some secret mating behind the alpha's back type thing.
So you found, based on the studies that you've done, that the average person is keeping an average of 13 secrets at a time. We should first of all say this has something to do with the actual act of reporting to one's self about this. In other words, if you were to just come up to me in a kind of startling moment and say, how many secrets you're keeping, Colin, I'd say, I don't know, 2. But if you give me if you sit me down with a form or you start interviewing me in a much more detailed way, I'm probably going to realize I've got more than that.
That's exactly right. And so when I first started presenting this research to people, the research on the hill slant stuff, judgments of the world around us, people would sometimes wonder, like, are you studying secrecy? Is this actually representative of what it's like to have a secret, just simply thinking about your secret? And that's when we realized actually there's almost any basic question we had at that time, there was no answer. And because prior studies sort of created secrets in the lab rather than looked at real secrets. And so the very first question I started asking was, well, what does secrecy look like in the world? What secrets do people keep? How many secrets do people keep? And we asked a couple thousand people, and then looked at those couple thousand responses about secrets they were keeping, and found that these 38 categories of secrets really well captured the data. And this list turns out to be really comprehensive. You can fit the list on one sheet of paper, and that really kind of describes almost the entire universe of secrecy. These are the kinds of secrets people commonly keep, and we see it in the US and we see it across the world. And it's so comprehensive that this list, if you looked at the 38 items on the list, the average person goes, oh, wow, gosh, I have about 13 secrets on average. When you look at the list, you start seeing ones you might not have thought about in a while.
And another thing that you found is that obviously there are different kind of gradations of secrets, including secrets that you're keeping that they're so essentially unimportant. I mean, you might have even forgotten that you have that secret. But the ones that you think about are the ones that are causing you the most pain. Is that sort of a right way to say it?
Yeah, it turns out that it's not how frequently you conceal a secret that's related to how harmful that secret is to your well-being. It's the secrets you frequently think most about and repetitively think about. Those are the ones that are more harmful.
And let's talk a little bit about the whole idea of confessing a secret. Okay, you can confess a secret to the people you have been keeping it from, and that comes with certain risks both to you and, as we've said, also to them. There are various kind of outsourcing ways to do this. It used to be pretty much the province of the church and the seal of confession. Now, of course, there's therapy. There are other opportunities to confess. Is it helpful to confess a secret to a less interested party? In other words, if you're not going to tell your partner or your brother or your father or your children this secret that's eating away at you, but you tell somebody else in a therapeutic context, let's say, what's the benefit of that? Are those kinds of confidants good for you?
Yes, and the reason for that is, if you're keeping a secret from someone and then you reveal your secret to that person, I call that confession. If you reveal it to a third party, whether it's a friend, a therapist, a bartender, whoever it is, I would call that confiding, sort of confiding the secret in someone while still keeping it from the person you're keeping it from or the people you're keeping it from. And confiding secrets, you really get the best of both worlds. For the time being, the secret is still secret from the person you're keeping it from. You avoid the risks of confession, and at the same time, you can get help with the secret while avoiding any potential damage that could come from revealing the secret to the people you're keeping it from. Other people who are not you just have another way of thinking about it and will have a fresh perspective, and they can give you things that you really can't find on your own, like emotional support. The average experience of confiding a secret in someone turns out to be very helpful.
There are, in some instances, I think, secrets which, instead of eating away at us or making us think that hills look steeper or distances look longer or burdens look heavier, give us a certain amount of joy. I mean, if you even think about the Beatles song, I've got a secret, we've got a secret, me and you, nobody knows, just we two. There's something joyous about that. There's something about me that you don't know. I'm having a certain kind of fun that nobody knows about. I mean, it's not necessarily priced into the idea of a secret that it's going to be an acid in your heart.
Yeah. And so it is a pretty small slice of the pie of all our secrets, but there is this type of secret that's totally different, and it can be fun and exciting and can fill you with joy. Maybe you're proposing marriage to your partner tomorrow. Maybe you've been trying to get pregnant and you are pregnant. And these things that we sometimes take control over the revelation of, perhaps the same way as a more prototypically negative secret, but it feels so different. We feel in control. We feel this sense of autonomy, and we have this plan, and we're following it through, and it feels good. And maybe the revelation's going to be very exciting, and we get to sort of look forward to that while it's secret. And so, what we call positive secrets turn out to be energizing rather than burdensome.
Right. I mean, a positive secret can be energizing at first and then not so much. I mean, the world is full of people who started out thinking everybody thinks I'm this boring housewife or this man in a gray flannel suit, but I'm actually having an affair with a stripper named Xanadu. I'm having this exciting secret life. And that can be very intoxicating and adrenaline producing at first. But then you start to realize, well, Xanadu maybe isn't going away all by yourself. So there's that too. I mean, one should maybe as we start to run out of time here a little bit, maybe just talk at the end about the value of sharing. I mean, ultimately, your parents apparently said to one another, he's doing all this interesting research on secrets. Maybe we should give him a call. But I mean, everybody faces that at some point. Do I tell or do I not tell? Talk a little bit about how to make that decision.
Right. So especially if we're talking about whether to confess to someone, do I tell or do I not tell? That's exactly the time to talk to someone else. And here are the people who are especially good at being confidants. People who are compassionate, people who will be non-judgmental, caring, empathic. Those are really helpful people to confide in. But also so are people who are assertive, someone who's going to push you to do the thing that you need to do. Another thing to look for when you're choosing who to confide in is essentially being sure that they have a similar set of morals as you. It turns out it's I would say rare. According to our studies, our best estimate is about 26% of secrets you tell someone, you confide in someone, they'll tell a third party about, they'll pass it on to someone else. I don't know if that sounds frightening or sort of relaxing, but that's more likely to happen if the person believes what you told them to be highly morally objectionable. So don't choose someone who's going to be scandalized by what you're telling them, because they might feel like a wrongful behavior needs to be punished, and one way to punish that is by passing your secret on. So don't choose someone who's going to be scandalized by what you're telling them. And then finally, think a little bit about whether you're going to entangle them into the problem. If you know about someone who's cheating on someone else, or don't confide that in someone. For example, if you're cheating, maybe be careful about who you tell. Don't tell someone who's now going to have to conceal it from your partner or conceal it from someone else's partner, someone who's going to now have to be implicated in the secret. But generally, confiding goes well because we choose our confidants carefully. We kind of know who can help and who can stay discreet. And it's just a matter of finding that person or figuring out who it is. And it could be anyone. It could be someone totally removed from it all, or just someone you trust.
All right, we've got to take a break here. I was going to tell Mike Pence about my second family. I'm not going to do that now that you said that. Meanwhile, Dr. Michael Slepian, great to have you back after 10 years. Let's make it 5 years. Come back for a teeth cleaning. Continue to floss. Associate professor at Columbia Business School, wrote the book, The Secret Life of Secrets. We'll be back with more.
At me. Don't please my folks too much.
My dear, call me insane. Choose a place, choose a life. The program insists I survive.
That's right. Choose a name, choose a place, choose a life for the sake of the program. That program in this case would be the Witness Protection Program, sometimes known as WITSEC. Joining us now is Raneta Lawson Mack, professor of law emerita at Creighton University School of Law. Raneta Lawson Mack did a study of the Witness Protection Program, its history, and some of the challenges it has faced. It is obviously one of the biggest secrets you can keep, is that you are not who you say you are, and if people knew who you really were, they would kill you. So first of all, welcome to our conversation, Raneta.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here and to talk about a topic that I sort of studied over 30 years, although not continuously, but checking in on the program occasionally.
So this program starts out in the late 60s, early 70s. It started because of exactly that people in certain criminal environments, if they become witnesses, their lives are a forfeit. So you got to hide them somewhere. My sense is from your research, initially, they hadn't really thought through a lot of the details of this. I mean, you're going to have to hide maybe a man plus his wife plus his kids. he and his wife might get divorced, right? There's a lot of moving pieces to witness protection and that secret.
Yeah, that's correct. The witness protection program was sort of an add-on to a bill that was introduced in the 1970, late 60s, 1970. And that bill overall was designed to eradicate organized crime. And one of the big pieces of the bill was the RICO statute. So that's what the bill is really known for. But at the time, when Congress was deciding, well, what's the best way to do this? We can have the RICO bill where we force people to forfeit their assets, but we also need a way to get at the top leaders of organized crime. And one way to do that is to get witnesses. And we have to incentivize people to become witnesses. And they obviously realize that once people testify that their lives could be in danger. But no one thought about it. No one thought through what does it mean to protect someone? What does it mean to take someone and give them a new identity? What does it mean for the government to lie about someone's identity, perhaps over the course of that person's entire life? And so the whole idea was, we have this program, but what do we do about it? How do we implement it? And no one planned that out initially, and no one anticipated the consequences either.
We're a little squeezed for time. We were going to play a clip from Goodfellas, which, of course, is based on a real person and a real witness protection participant. But, I mean, I think the point of Goodfellas is a really interesting one, which is that people are living colorful lives, exciting lives, stimulating lives where they've got access to money and intoxicants, and that's why they became criminal associates in the first place. Right. And that's all their friends are there, too. And so this whole program says, we're going to take you all that away from you, take you away from all that, put you someplace that's probably a little bit more boring, in a life that's a lot less stimulating, with people that you don't know, and you can never talk about what you did before. And how realistic was it to think that people would always be able to do that and keep it secret?
Well, the whole idea was that people would acclimate themselves because they would sort of do the cost-benefit analysis. The government is giving me a chance to start over and not get killed, right? So the cost-benefit analysis, I have this new life in a boring place, but the other part of it is that if I reveal who I am, if I mess up in this program, then I'm going to be killed. And so the government was counting on people doing that cost-benefit analysis, but it didn't necessarily work out. And as you mentioned, Henry Hill, who was part of the Goodfellas, he actually opened a restaurant out in Connecticut at one point. And it burned to the ground shortly thereafter, perhaps under criminal circumstances. But nonetheless, people did go back to their criminal activities.
Right. Or reach out to Confederates. You mentioned the case of a woman named Brenda Paz, who had been in MS-13, and she just reached out because she was isolated and lonely. This was not a good idea.
That's exactly right. The psychological problems that arose from having to isolate yourself from family and friends, and in her case, and in many cases when people are involved in gang activity and even organized crime activity, that becomes their family. And so to cut them off from that, and in Brenda's case, to cut her off from that meant really to cut off most of her life. And so she could not resist, and the consequences for her, unfortunately, were deadly when she reached out to people in that gang.
Okay, and I mean, in some instances, it works out differently. There's a guy named Herbert Itkin who was a witness, entered the program, as they call it, because he testified against a guy named Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo. And then years and years later, he runs into Tony Ducks on the street. And what does Tony Ducks say to him?
Tony Ducks said, "You really did a number on us." And then they just walked on. And so that sort of fits one of the narratives that came up at the time the program was initiated is, what is the real threat to people? And are we overestimating that threat? More recently, there was the possibility of the rapper Tekashi 6ix9ine. He testified against some gang members, and they were floating the idea of the witness protection program. He has tattoos all over his face, and so they were sort of speculating, what can we do to get him into the witness protection program? Ultimately, he said, I don't want to do that. And he just got his own private security team that's going to be around him 24 hours a day. And so far, he seems to be well. This was 2019 when he testified, and he still seems to be doing fine, even though he gave lots of testimony against gang members.
So, Raneta, I'm on kind of a tight clock here, and I would like to talk to you so much more about this. But I think one point that you make that's really interesting is sometimes the government winds up keeping a secret from itself. You get a terrorist out of an organization, that terrorist becomes a cooperating witness, but the person's name gets changed and is no longer tracked. If that person should go back to the life of terrorism, that person is kind of gone off the necessary surveillance radar.
That's right. And that was a sort of a new twist to the witness protection program. Again, infiltrating terrorist organizations is a little bit different from organized crime because for terrorists, generally speaking, they are wedded to the ideology rather than the terrorist organization. And so taking them out of that environment doesn't necessarily take away their commitment to the ideology. And so if you lose track of them, it's possible that they could reoffend because they've left the organization, but not necessarily left the ideology. So the government could be creating other terrorist groups by hiding and protecting people from one terrorist organization.
Right. Just because one arm of the government or one agency of the government knows who and where this new identity is, it doesn't mean everybody who might need to know knows. We do have to stop there. Raneta, Lawson, Mack, this is fascinating stuff. Professor of Law Emerita at Creighton University School of Law, done an extensive study of WITSEC. All right. We'll take another break. We'll come back. We'll talk about how conspiracy theories can work if people can't keep a secret.
Solid left should make my eye teeth jive. I must confess, you got me good this time. I'm so repentant.
Support for Connecticut Public Radio comes from Middlesex Health, Connecticut's connection to second opinions from specialists at Mayo Clinic at no cost to you.
So today's show, I have to say a few thank yous. Kat Pastor is our technical producer, pretty much as usual. The episode today was produced by McCusker, formerly known as Carolyn McCusker, but we rebranded her. I'm sure that Jonathan McPants has contributed in some way as well. I'm just not sure how. Yes, and so if you listen to this show a lot, you know that this next topic comes up with some frequency. It's how can there be conspiracies that require the secrecy and the confidence keeping of large numbers of people? And I think, Kat, if we could just play C1 here, nothing demonstrates this phenomenon as well as this.
No sooner had we defeated Germany than a new threat started appearing in skies over America, drawn to Earth by the latest threat to extinction, the H-bomb. Explosions acting as transducers, drawing alien life forms through wormholes in spaceships using electrogravitic propulsion. Advanced extraterrestrial species visiting us, concerned for mankind and the threat of our self-destruction, forestalling our annihilation through their own self-sacrifice, and crashes at Roswell, more importantly, places like Aztec. World leaders signed secret memos directing scientific studies of alien technology and biochemistry. Classified studies were done at military installations S4, Groom Lake, Wright-Patterson, and Dulce. Extracting alien tissue. Tests were done on unsuspecting human subjects. And elaborately staged abductions in craft using alien technology recovered from the down saucers.
Did you get all that? All right. So that, of course, is from the X-Files. But, we deal with this all the time. And in fact, the X-Files is putatively fiction, but we're back in the thick of another conversation about recovered UAPs and dead alien bodies and stuff like that. The question is, how could such a secret be kept? And somebody who's thought a lot about that is Dr. David Robert Grimes, a scientist and science writer. He's joining us now. So this all kind of started when you were getting a bunch of, I think, DMs about conspiracy theories. Tell us a little bit about the launching pad for this quest of yours.
Yeah, it was very inadvertent. It definitely wasn't part of my plan. So for years I was writing about topics that are scientifically non-contentious, but in the public mind can be. Things like climate change or water fluoridation or, God forbid, vaccination, as we've recently all seen, can wind people up the wrong way. And every time I'd write about these topics, I'd get emails not only alleging there was a giant conspiracy, but somehow alleging that I was competent enough to be part of it. And this made me very curious because occasionally you'd do talks and you'd meet people that would say the exact same thing with all conviction. And I decided to take a very devil's advocate approach to it and say, well, let's imagine there was a giant conspiracy. How likely is it that we could sustain that, and how much effort would it require? And I guess that's what was my launching pad for looking at this stuff.
Right. And this is a very serious matter because, in fact, if you can get people to believe that there is a conspiracy to conceal the bad side effects of a very important and useful vaccine, or conceal the fact that Bill Gates is putting microchips in your bloodstream or something, whatever it is. I mean, if you can get people to believe that kind of thing, you can significantly impede not only the march of science, but in fact public health and the safety of other people.
And we've seen that during the pandemic to a huge way. I mean, I never thought we'd envision an area where people wouldn't get vaccinated because they believed that the guy who invented Windows was putting microchips in them. It's funny in one level, and on another level it becomes much, as you point out, much less amusing when it translates into public health. Right.
Well, I never thought I would see the day that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would be polling at 19% among putatively sane people. So I think it's important, and this is the beginning of your research in a way, there are some conspiracy allegations that turn out to be true. They tend to be the less well-known ones. But for example, Edward Snowden in 2013 exposed, I think, what we could call a conspiracy, right?
Absolutely. And that's a really important caveat. Conspiracies do happen. If you and I, Colin, decide we're going to rob a bank tomorrow, well, firstly, I don't know how we're going to do that because I'm on the other side of the Atlantic. But if we decide to do it, that's a conspiracy. Criminal conspiracies happen all the time, political conspiracies. But historically, they tend to be kind of closed affairs. Back in the 1500s, Machiavelli was warning the prince in his dialogue against conspiracies because they're so likely to crumble. And Benjamin Franklin once said that 3 men could keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. So the problem with conspiracies is the more people you involve, the harder it is to keep the cat in the bag. And the problem with these massive scale conspiracies that people do tend to believe in, say about climate change or vaccination, is that they a priori require hundreds of thousands of willing participants to be kind of nefarious. And that's when you start running into a problem. It's not that conspiracies don't happen. You look at the Snowden example that you used there, the PRISM project. That was exposed, and it involved about 32,000 people at maximum. It was exposed after 6 years because Snowden felt it was unethical and blew the whistle on it. And in doing so, he also showed the documents that proved no one denied that PRISM was happening. That was one thing that I think is really important. No one said, oh, he's making it up. Once he had the receipts, so to speak, it was very clear. That's how quickly these things can be exposed.
Right. And let's take another one that's a real thing, and that would be the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. This is something that was hidden from a lot of people, especially the people who were the unwitting subjects of the experiments. So say a little bit about that one and what level of secrecy and collaboration was required to make that a secret.
That one's a really interesting one. And when I was doing the original paper on this, it kind of threw me whether I should use it as an example or not, because it started off as something quite hidden. But within 10 years or so of it starting, this was basically people would come in who had syphilis, usually black men, and they were intentionally not informed or treated by the doctors. And originally it was before they had treatment, but even after we had treatments, they were deliberately not told about it. And this went on until the 1970s, from the 1930s to the 1970s. And people were publishing in medical journals. So while it was, in some respects, intentionally secretive, it wasn't even that well controlled, given they were publishing about it. So it kind of blurs that boundary between, was that a conspiracy or is that just something incredibly unethical that people did not blow the whistle on quick enough?
So when these things get bigger, we are having a conversation here in this country about, for example, dead extraterrestrials and just other things related to identified aerial phenomena, or I guess they're anomalous phenomena now. But the numbers can get very big. But let's go back a little bit in time. The idea that the moon landings were a hoax. There's a significant number of people, and at least there was, I think, a significant. Yeah, go ahead. Still is. All right. So talk about sort of what it takes. You developed a formula, basically, to try to figure out number of conspirators and length of time they would have to keep the secret. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. And again, I come at this from a very public understanding angle. I mean, in the 2016 paper, I originally did this in, and also in my book, Good Thinking, I'm always trying to say, look, we'll play devil's advocate. We won't mock people for having strange beliefs. We all have strange beliefs. So the idea is a moon landing hoax. If we started that as our initial position, we can go, okay, how many people would that involve? And the amount of contractors and staff in NASA at the time for the Apollo project is roughly around the 400,000 mark or so. Now, then you go, if every person who's involved in that conspiracy, and these are people who would have to be fully complicit, they'd have to know that this was a deliberate attempt to deceive. Let's assume each one of them have some tiny but finite chance of letting the cat out of the bag. They send the message to the wrong person, or they get a conscience and they blow the whistle. And even though that chance is very small, we'll presume they're better secret keepers than the NSA, right? We'll use Snowden as a benchmark here. We can then extrapolate that using very well-known probabilistic mathematics. And we can get a rough estimate of how quickly will that persist until it fails. And the answer is, even with the best assumptions for the conspirators, even when everything goes in their favor, those kind of conspiracies would be doomed to a very young death. Because unfortunately, when you are trying to keep secrets with hundreds of thousands of people, it's just very difficult to do. And that's essentially what the maths spat out when you put it through, which I don't think is that surprising in some respects.
So, and you actually have kind of worked out the kind of the likelihood of collapse within a certain amount of time, right? I mean, you've developed a way of kind of estimating how long the moon landing hoax could be kept secret if it actually were a secret.
Under best case scenario, you're looking at about 3 to 4 years for most of these massive conspiracies. And that, again, is already unrealistic because we're already assuming that everyone involved is really determined to keep this a secret and has no ethical problems with it and is a better secret agent, so to speak, than the top intelligence agencies in the US. And even under all those assumptions, which are already unlikely, the devil's advocate argument kind of falls apart. So the reason I came up with that was solely to, firstly, to check my own assumptions, but also to say, look, here's an educational tool that we can show, even if we assume all this is true, these giant conspiracies are just very, very mathematically unlikely to endure, even under the optimum case for them to do so.
Right. So if 411,000 people have to keep the moon landing secret, even if you get Benjamin Franklin to kill 2 of them for you, it would still be 410,998 people would have to be keeping that secret. It seems unlikely, just an unwieldy amount. So there's this movie you may have heard about called Oppenheimer, and it talks about how the atomic bomb was developed under conditions of secrecy. And one of the tools they use is compartmentalization. The idea being that that if everybody knows a little piece, if there aren't many people who know the whole story. People know little parts of the story.
Absolutely.
So that's a way of keeping a secret. I should say that, just having studied that particular thing in college, the scientists complained all the time about this, and they said, this is not how you do science. You cannot do science if you are limiting our access to some of the pertinent information. But talk a little bit about that idea. Yeah.
So this is the idea of what's called compartmentalization. It's a very common idea in the intelligence services. The idea is if everyone only knows a little bit about what they're doing, no one has the full picture bar some people at the top. And the whole idea is, again, that intuitively intelligence agencies know what I kind of mathematically worked out, that it's very hard to keep secrets of big groups. So in the Manhattan Project, different groups knew aspects of what they were doing, but not the full details. I think that was a frustration to the scientists. Indeed, because this is not how science is done, you kind of have to be very open. This is incidentally why a climate change conspiracy hoax spanning the world would be virtually impossible, because you'd need everyone to be fully complicit. You couldn't compartmentalize it. That's why I focused on scientific conspiracies rather than the giant umbrella of conspiracies that involves politics. And even with the Manhattan Project, which was remarkably effective over its lifetime, they still had the problem of spies, which, of course, made things like Klaus Fuchs, for example, was involved in that. And there was other spies as well. So even these projects, with their compartmentalization, are very difficult to maintain. But if you do want to keep a secret, the lesson here the intelligence agencies all know is the smallest amount of people that need to know. And everyone else only knows a small portion.
Right. And, you just brought up an important thing about the Klaus Fuchs, too, which is another thing that you have to kind of think about a little bit is, yes, there's in the case of climate change, 405,000 people who need to keep the secret. And, of course, this is all based on the fact that the heavily funded solar, wind power, and electric car industry has sat on this information that climate change is a hoax, and the drastically underfunded and small, unable to mount a defense fossil fuel industry has been unable to overturn and expose this hoax. But I mean, all joking,
mom and pop outfit.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All joking aside, you'd have a lot of people with a lot of incentive to, and some of the other things you've looked at, yes, unsafe vaccines are being covered up, cure for cancer is being suppressed by big pharma. In all of these instances, it's not just how many people keep the secret, but how many people who are not spies, but just interested parties of one sort or another, would have a tremendous incentive to expose the hoax, right? And that, in a way, starts the clock running faster.
Absolutely. And you've got to remember that 37% of Americans believe the FDA is suppressing a hidden cure for cancer, despite the fact that over half of us will suffer cancer a lifetime. It's like they'd be acting against their own interest. And a lot of the reason for this, again, you're absolutely correct in what you say, but if you take the fossil fuel industry, they have for years been complicit in disinformation campaigns against, say, renewable energy or things like that. And while they wouldn't necessarily put out conspiracy theories, they do very little to discourage them. So if people want to believe that climate change is a hoax, I don't think you're going to see many fossil fuel companies object to that, even though, as you point out, these are not small industries. These are huge multi-billion-dollar companies. So sometimes the fixation with conspiracy theories means that people miss out the very real ones that are happening in front of them, or the very real intentions to deceive. The example I always give of that is, for example, there was a massive panic over 5G. You probably remember a few years ago, there was protests, things like that. An awful lot of that disinformation campaign was funded from Russia. And there's a slight irony where people were, being interviewed by the New York Times, insisting that there was a giant conspiracy from cell phone companies, not realizing that they were really being pawns in a more sinister game they were useful idiots to a different plot. So to me, there's at least a little bit of charming irony in that.
So let me play devil's advocate, although I'm very on board with everything that you're saying. But just to play devil's advocate, I could say, well, in a lot of these instances, there is leakage of a sort. In other words, one of the reasons we've been having a decades-long conversation about UFOs and crashes at Roswell and things like Project Blue Book, and this goes back decades and decades and decades. You could find somebody at the end of a bar or pub or a coffee shop or wherever who would tell you all about this. They know absolutely everything about this, and that's been the case for a long time. So I think somebody who is a full-blown UFO conspiracist or Kennedy assassination conspiracist would say, what secret? Of course there's been leakage. That's why I know about it right now. What's your response to that?
Well, I think the Snowden example is a very strong one, a rebuttal against that. When Edward Snowden came out and said, right, this is a project going on, he came out with all the documents. Whistleblowers tend to do that. The Pentagon Papers is another classic example. So if you really can prove it and you're not just talking a lot of guff, it's very hard for people to rebuff that. The fact that people can't, there's always people who will talk a big game and will exaggerate or make things up.
Oh no, I think the NSA has jammed our transmissions. It's a conspiracy. We have lost our guest. This could be like the perfect paranoid note to end the show on. We've been talking to David Robert Grimes, who is a scientist and science writer, on the assumption that he's not coming back. Let me say goodbye. Thanks to everybody who helped out today, and we will be back with you tomorrow and the next day and many days after that.